We are at an important juncture in our nation's history, though. I think the very purposes of our government and civil society are being questioned, and there's very divisive rhetoric about the challenges we face as a nation. But we have to move forward. We have to keep going and address those issues and go ahead. But I think that both real and perceived problems with our government structure and its effectiveness have poisoned the views of some of our citizens about the role of the federal government and its capacity to solve problems. There was a recent Gallup poll. We all like Gallup polls. Only 7% of our citizens have confidence in Congress as an institution. That's the lowest the number has ever been. And congressional approval is now lower than public approval of traffic jams, of Brussels sprouts, and of cockroaches. Now, our current national political climate makes promoting engagement, a shared understanding of our history, and a commitment to our future more challenging than perhaps it's been in the past. But I think teaching tomorrow's leaders to be active and informed is what we have to do as responsible citizens. And I think the way forward, whatever the problems, really starts in our schools. And if we're to restore faith in the democratic process and the workings of our country, I think it's critical that our nation's schools be given our full attention and support and discussion to see how we can make it better. On the last nationwide civics assessment test, there was one, 2/3 of the students scored below proficient, and only 1/3 of adult Americans were able to name the 3 branches of government. Now that really took me by surprise. That is a very low figure, let alone describe their roles in our society. Less than 1/5 of the high school seniors tested could explain how citizen participation benefits democracy. Less than 1/3 of 8th graders could identify the historical purpose of the Declaration of Independence, and it's right there in the name. Now, what does that mean? I think it means we're failing to impart the basic knowledge that young people need to know to become effective citizens in our country. I suspect every person in this room, especially any teachers who are here, would appreciate a citizenry better trained in the basic details of civics and of civil discussion. But in too many schools, the subject of civics is considered an elective or peripheral subject. It's kind of been pushed aside. But we are at an important point in our nation's history, and I think the health of our democracy, it depends on the young people who are here today, the young people of our country, and the next generation. And we really do have to try to educate our students to prepare them to be citizens in the future and to have good discussion on important issues if they're going to navigate this world of partisan politics and the news media. So we need to prepare all our young people to be informed and engaged participants in our democracy. And it's not just peripheral to education. I think it's essential. And I think that our founding fathers and mothers certainly didn't consider civic education to be elective. Many of the founders, including Jefferson and Madison and Adams, were early advocates of public schools because they thought education was the best way to build a well-informed citizenry. And the first American public schools were founded with that civic mission in mind. And I think throughout much of our history, civic education was prioritized. So I think it matters, and I think it's consistent with our history. And civic education is very important, particularly during periods of polarization and partisan gridlock. And so I think current federal political climate in this country makes civic education very challenging but increasingly important. And I hope we can focus on it as a nation, as a state, as citizens. I think it really matters. And we have to teach tomorrow's leaders to be good citizens. What do you think? Are we on the right track?
You got it.
Okay. Now the question is how we're going to get there. I don't need to tell you how complex the language of our democracy has become, but I wonder how many of your schools have as their stated mission to prepare students for citizenship. I just don't know if that's part of the focus anymore. And I wonder whether it's reflected in the curricula in the schools that we have today. Are we training for citizenship? We certainly still like to teach young people how to read and to write, and we try to teach them some science. But I hope we are also concerned about and trying to teach them how to be good citizens. And that civics as a subject is still very important to us in this country. So I know, some of you sitting in this room must already have formed some opinions on that subject. And you probably know that at least one core purpose of our system is to produce good citizens. Eleanor Roosevelt put it this way: on the public school largely depends the success or failure of our great experiment in government by the people, for the people. And I think maybe she was right. It's funny about Eleanor Roosevelt. She was not physically very attractive, but she had a real impact on the country. And I was sent off to school. I grew up on a ranch in a remote place in Arizona and New Mexico. There wasn't a school anywhere near. So I was sent off to live with grandparents in El Paso, Texas, and go to school there. And I was in school there one day when Eleanor Roosevelt visited our school. And it was really amazing. I was pretty excited, but I did not dare tell my parents. If there was one person that my father thought was a total disaster, it was Eleanor Roosevelt. And I knew that if I told him I was going to see her, he'd yank me out of school and send me back to the ranch right away. So I didn't tell him, but that day is still dramatically in my mind. And I remember all of us little students, the little girls, were lined up and standing out by the flagpole at the school. And here came the limo that had Eleanor Roosevelt in the back seat. And we were all, craning our necks to see her and watch her. And she got out of the car and walked up to where the flagpole was in front of the school and where all of us were kind of assembled. And she just conducted herself extremely well and seemed very pleased to see all of us and made some very generous comments, none of which I ever dared to repeat to my father. But I well remember that, and she was certainly a supporter of public school education. But the civics courses of years past, when I was in school, didn't capture a lot of interest by the students in school. They certainly didn't capture my interest particularly. Did they yours? I mean, were civics courses anything you cared about?
Well, it was not the most exciting thing in the world, but one got through it, and and perhaps to one's own surprise later on, knew something that was really worth knowing.
Yeah, I know. Even the flawed civics instruction that we used to have is better than some of what we have now, because I think the subject of civics, as we called it, has disappeared from many agendas of grade schools and high schools in the U.S. today. I think it's been in decline. Almost half of our states today no longer require students to take a civics or government class for high school graduation. And for the middle schools, I found that only 3 states include a separate civics course as part of their standards. So I think things have kind of declined since those days at Radford School when I was standing out by the flagpole. I don't know, but federal education policy today, the No Child Left Behind law, certainly presents some issues that we're going to have to address. Whether anything can be changed since the passage of that, I'm not sure. But we had tested high school students along with those of about 20 other Western nations before we passed that No Child Left Behind law. And American students came in near the bottom in math and science among all the nation's students who were tested. And I thought that was pretty frightening. So we did see Congress pass laws providing some federal money to public schools to be distributed on the basis of test scores in math and science, and also test scores in English literacy. But the law didn't include civics, knowledge about civics or history, and so we didn't have any push of that to improve things. And I think the lack of civic knowledge does have an impact now on the level of the engagement of young people in the next generation to come along. The majority of young people today say they do want to vote, but they don't feel that they know enough about candidates to make informed choices. Maybe we all feel that, I don't know, but certainly the young people we question does. And I think we need to take action to reverse the trend that we've had of removing civic education from our public schools. I think we still need it. And it's up to all of us as citizens to see that we get it. And I do believe that all of us should inquire about the extent of the education about civics in our schools today, in our various states. And I think we need to insist that a little more time be required for teaching civics. And we need to update the curriculum and the teaching methods to address the needs of our students today. And I hope all of us can devote a little time to that. And I know it's hard for teachers to find time to dedicate to civics. Their time is scarce, it is, and they need to be sure they know math and science and all the other things. So I don't think they would be wildly supportive of a focus on another subject like civic education. But I do think we need to work on it and need to make sure that each of our states uses a modern system of civics education, bring it into the 21st century, I think. So one of the things I hope that you will do in the next few months that you have here is to make sure that in your state you discuss what needs to be done to improve what we call civics education.